Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday night training. I'm Honey Sagari, founder and CEO of Qyral. You already probably know this, and if you don't, I'm super passionate about aging and longevity, which is probably why Qyral was started in the first place. And educating all of you about longevity is one of my greatest passions. And tonight, we're here to talk about the 9 hallmarks of aging. Some of you may be wondering what that even is, but before we discuss the 9 hallmarks of aging, I'd like to reintroduce you to our special guest, Dr. Georgia Braimakis. She's a doctor of internal medicine who studied at Athens University Medical School in Greece, and her focus has been preventative disease. I love that. She holds a master's degree in biomedical engineering and nanotechnologies from Harvard University. Every day in her practice, she sees patients who have continued to link metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and all these other issues. So you get to experience that and see that. Dr. Braimakis, thank you for joining us this evening. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you for having me. It's very nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So before we get started, would you share with us a little about your passion in the world of longevity and how that came about, and just share a little about yourself with us?
Sure. I've been working in preventive medicine for many years, over 20 years, but recently in the last few years, there's a lot of exciting developments going on in the sense that there's a lot of research going on about age reversal. Beyond lifestyle modifications, we have now a lot of research going on about medications and various molecules that are being tested or repurposed for reversing disease. Now, in real clinical practice, what I find mostly exciting, for the first time after many years, in the last couple of years, I've been seeing patients reversing their chronic medical conditions. I've had a number of patients in the last few weeks that are off diabetes medications, completely reverse their diabetes, and a few that have reversed their blood pressure. It is important to note that if somebody's way too far gone and their arteries in their heart are completely clogged up, right now we don't have the ability to reverse that, but we do have the ability to reverse diabetes, high blood pressure, and metabolic syndrome through lifestyle modifications. And I think with new medications that are going to be coming on board in the next few years, or even supplements that are available now, we can accelerate that process. I also see a lot of centenarians these days. This week, I saw about 4, I think, patients, all women so far, over the age of 100 up to 104, and a few men in their 90s that were doing really well. So that's exciting. That's something new that I've been seeing in my practice.
So aging is very complex, right? There's not one thing that scientists have been able to pinpoint as this is the cause of aging. It's very complex, and that's where the 9 hallmarks come in, and we'll discuss that. But before we get into that, can you discuss with us the difference between lifespan and health span? And can you also talk to us about biological age, chronological age, these terms that we're hearing? Can you discuss that with us?
Definitely. Lifespan is very simply how long we live, right? But health span is how long do we live healthily? So usually the health span is shorter than the lifespan, and the last few years of someone's life, or even decades, are not in good health. So the goal is to increase health span to match lifespan. So we want to live really long, but we want to live healthily. Right now, that's really not happening. In many patients, they spend half of their life with illness. So again, just to summarize, lifespan is the number of years we live, and health span is how long do we live healthily out of those years. Now, when it comes to the chronological age versus the biological age, chronological just means time. How long have we been alive? Somebody who's 80 years old has been around for 80 years. That's the chronological age, depending on your date of birth. But biological age just means how young or how old is this person's body compared to the general population. So there are some people that are, let's say, 80 years old, but they do certain tests that are available actually commercially for any one of us to do if we wanted to, and they may turn out to be 65. And then there's another 80-year-old potentially that could be more like a 90-year-old in terms of their function. How do we determine that? There's a process, for example, called DNA methylation, which is also one of the hallmarks of aging, that shows how is DNA processed? How are we able to use our DNA? So as we age, we are not able to use our DNA as effectively, and we are able to measure that. So our biological age means how young or how old are we, regardless of our age, how many years have we been on this earth?
Thanks for explaining that. And so let's dive right into the 9 hallmarks. Tell us, what is it? Who came up with it? Why is it 9? Why is it not 10? Why is it, just talk to us a little about the 9 marks and the 9 hallmarks, and then we'll go into each one and what we can do.
Yeah, definitely. Aging is a process that's not really understood well. We don't really know why we age or why we die. And originally it was thought that our cells die and that's why we die, but that is really not the case. Our cells constantly die and new cells are formed. And that's an important process. If our cells never died, we probably develop a lot of cancer. So cell death is not the cause of age. We do not know really what's causing it. However, this one aging process expresses itself in many different ways and in many different levels, sometimes at the cellular level, sometimes at the molecular level or the DNA level. So to take an example from the work that was done by some Spanish researchers about 10 years ago, they found, and this was already known, but they just put this all together, that we have a lot of mutations. Mutations means when our DNA changes. And how does our DNA change? Sometimes it changes randomly. It's just a mistake that happens. But there are processes that accelerate that aging. Ultraviolet radiation, like being in the sun, will accelerate those mutations, those abnormal changes in our DNA structure. Pollution, smoking, genetic factors. So our DNA doesn't copy itself appropriately. And when that happens, that can be the source of disease. It can be the source of cancer very frequently and dysfunction in the cell. So as we age, we have more and more of these abnormal changes in our DNA. A second factor is what's called the telomeres shrink. So telomeres are, if you think of each chromosome, everybody I assume knows we have 46 chromosomes, like 23 pairs of 2 each. They look like the letter X, with the exception of one chromosome in men, it looks like a Y. So at the very tip of each of these X's, so there's 4 of these tips, right? It's like shoelaces, protective caps, so to speak. So our DNA remains protected. Now, every time the cell divides, those telomeres, those protective caps, start shrinking. And when they shrink a lot, like after 50 divisions or so, there's a lot of dysfunction in that chromosome. And we find that as we get older, the telomeres shrink, and they are associated with a lot of medical conditions. And now there is some interesting research. They're rebuilding those telomeres through RNA. And they found actually that they can restore not only the structure of the chromosome with the normal telomere protective caps, but also the function of those chromosomes. So they studied some children that were aging. There's a very rare condition called progeria, where children have the biological age, as we talked about, of an 80-year-old, even though they may be 10 years old. They were able to reverse, in animal models, they were able to reverse that damage that was done. So children became, the young mice started becoming more like what they were supposed to be, and not like the aged mice that they were originally.
So just to take it back, you have your telomere, you have these little end caps, like the aglets on shoelaces. After a while, as we get older, whatever, these little aglets shrink, and now the DNA is exposed, right? It doesn't have that protective cap. So what ultimately happens when that protective cap is gone? Is that like, what exactly happens?
The DNA is more vulnerable to damage. So all those DNA, it's not just mutations, it's just damage from environmental factors, from oxidants, like toxic compounds that are produced during metabolism. So the DNA is more susceptible. That's what happens.
So it's literally like a frayed shoelace at the end of the day. It's like,
that would be the metaphor. That would be the equivalent, the analogy. Exactly. So
what can we do as far as telomere attrition goes? What can we do to help preserve that earlier on in life and as we age?
Well, the good news is all these 9 hallmarks of aging are really reversible in the same way. And that has to do with mostly with lifestyle modification. Just like aging is one process, the way we reverse that process is also one thing. So that would encompass we're not talking about medications right now, we're talking about what we can do at home every day, has to do with what we eat, how much we eat, and how often we eat. And we can go into more details if you'd like. The types of food we eat, how often we exercise and what type of exercise we do, the intensity of exercise and the frequency, whether we sleep and how we sleep, and what times of the night we should be sleeping for optimal reversal of all these negative processes. Also, stress is a huge factor. Stress is not just in our mind. Stress is something that causes physiological changes the way our body functions, and can age us very, very rapidly. And other things that we can do is to stress our body short-term in a physical manner. So long-term psychological stress is very damaging. However, a very short-term, for a few minutes, physical stress, like feeling cold or feeling hot, or exercising really, really fast for 5 minutes, that actually reverses all these damages that we've been talking about. And I'm happy to go into more details for any of these if you'd like.
Sure. Okay, so we got what was the first one?
The
Sorry.
genomic stability of the DNA with the mutations.
Okay, so genomic instability is number one hallmark. So number two, we got telomere attrition, telomere shortening, the end caps. What's number three?
The third one is called epigenetic changes. So epi means on top of. So we know that the genes are there, right? But then these genes don't express themselves all the time. So we have factors in our body that turn these genes on and off. And a lot of these factors are influenced by the environment. Again, all these things we talked about, aside from age, which increases those changes, all the toxic influences from the environment, our diet, our exercise, our stress, will block the expression of certain of the genes. So things that we want to do, like things that will rejuvenate us, we block them if we're stressed out. And vice versa, we activate genes that cause disease when we have bad lifestyle, or if we're under a lot of pressure in the long run. So the epigenetic means something that switches the genes on and off, something in the environment. So the genome, all our DNA, is not something static that just sits there and constantly produces proteins. It's something that we and our environment turn on and off, and we can influence that through a healthy lifestyle.
All right, and so let's move on to number four. What is number four?
What the researchers called was loss of proteostasis. Very simply, that means proteins become abnormal. So proteins, for example, in our brain, in Alzheimer's, they fold in an incorrect manner. Same thing with Parkinson's, for example. There are abnormal proteins in some rare neurological conditions. That is because the proteins have been damaged. They don't function properly. And this is one of the main issues with aging, is abnormal proteins. So loss of proteostasis means we're losing the ability to have normal proteins, and they become dysfunctional in many cases. So just to say it very simply.
Can you just talk about how the proteins, like what that means for everyday people, right? Is protein, why does protein play such a crucial role in our body, right? Or amino acids that make up protein. So amino acids, if you could walk through it, amino acids, peptides, protein, why these matter in our body?
Yeah, obviously everything is important, right, for survival, but proteins are really at the center, the most important nutrient, because they play a role in every function. They play a structural role. For example, our muscles are made of protein, right? Every enzyme, which is a protein that allows a chemical reaction to happen, is a protein. So an enzyme, without an enzyme, we can't live. No chemical reactions will take place. We can't build anything. We can't produce any energy. So those enzymes that accelerate and allow these reactions to happen are all proteins. Then all our hormones are proteins. All the shuttles for things that we carry around the body, let's say cholesterol, I'm talking about the good cholesterol, about CoQ10, things that are carried around the body, albumin, these are all proteins. Yes, other things are important, like fats are important as well. We need to store energy, right? We need fats for our brain. However, proteins have so many different functions, and they're crucial. We don't need a huge amount of protein in our diet. Just a 15% at the most 20% for an average person. But it's just that the core of metabolism are proteins because of the multifaceted role that they have.
So loss of proteases, right? What is
Proteostasis.
that proteostasis, loss of that, how does that affect these creatine proteins?
So proteostasis is really the balance of proteins. So stasis in Greek means balance, and proteo means protein. So our body is like a well-wounded clock, right? It's all very well coordinated, and proteins play a crucial role. If some of the proteins start not folding properly, and to make everybody understand, proteins are not just chains of amino acids. Yes, there are chains, but then they have to fold in certain ways. And if they don't fold an appropriate way in the 3D dimension, they don't function properly. So with aging, we lose the ability to fold some of these proteins appropriately, or if they're already folded appropriately, they can be damaged and lose their 3D shape. So that's when we lose the balance of proteins. That's what it just simply means. Loss of proteostasis, we don't have a normal balance of the shapes of the proteins that we need. So the word stasis occurs in biology a lot. There's homeostasis, which means we keep everything steady. We don't want the pressure to be high or not too low. So if something goes up, it will come down. We want stability. So proteostasis is stability in proteins.
And so, okay, we'll talk more about each one of these, what we can do to preserve but let's go into number 5.
So number 5, the 4 ones that we mentioned are the core ones, and the remainder are pretty much derived from the other ones. So the next one would be an inability for us to sense appropriately what we need for nutrition. We have a really well-balanced ability to figure out what we need to eat. So sometimes when we have, let's say, a chocolate craving, we may be low in magnesium because chocolate has a good amount of magnesium. So that's why we have different cravings every time. It's not just in our head. So as we get older, we don't have the ability to sense that very well. We don't sense also very well when we are satiated. Some of our hormones that are related to digestion and eating are off. There's, for example, a hormone called leptin, which allows us to feel satiated after eating. So in some people, there's a deficiency of leptin, especially as we age, and we just keep eating, even though we don't need any more food, but our body is unable to sense it. And then there's other hormones, again, for food intake. Ghrelin is the one that makes us hungry. That's off. So we have overproduction of ghrelin in some cases. So we are not able to sense what we need, not just in terms of the food in general, but what kind of nutrients. So we ended up not eating what we need in the amounts that we need as we age.
That's so interesting. So loss of nutrient sensing, and therefore
Yes.
that ability to know. Okay.
Another.
Go
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to go to the next one because that's really crucial. A lot of diseases now are really based on dysfunction of mitochondria. Those are the energy production factories in our cells. And we find as we age, we lose a lot of mitochondria. So we have fewer mitochondria. So we can make a lot of energy. That's why older people are more fatigued. Their tissues don't function properly. If you don't produce energy, you don't feel energetic, obviously. And also your cells don't function well. That's why mitochondria are crucial. So as we age, we lose the number of mitochondria, but also the ability of the ones that we do have left to function appropriately. So it turns out now a lot of the aging processes are related to deficient mitochondria, but also specific diseases in younger people. If they lose a lot of mitochondria for some reason, they develop a lot of medical conditions that are related to loss of mitochondrial function. And the good news is we can do a lot of things to preserve that or reverse or build new mitochondria. So some of them are the lifestyle changes that we're talking about. For example, exercise is a huge way of increasing our mitochondria and having healthier mitochondria. Intermittent fasting, where we don't eat constantly, we just eat in a short eating window, also increases our mitochondria. A supplement called NMN, or nicotinamide mononucleotide, that's actually available over the counter. That is a precursor to something that our mitochondria use to produce energy. So we can boost the function of our mitochondria, not necessarily produce new ones, but to boost the function of the ones we already have. That is something that is available, widely available and easily accessible. And then something that probably many of us already have heard is CoQ10 or coenzyme Q10. It's like a vitamin, like a supplement that really boosts also energy production in the mitochondria. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is I have a lot of patients that are on statins. These are cholesterol lowering medications like Lipitor, Crestor, or they're called atorvastatin or rosuvastatin for those that know the generic names. When we use those medications to lower cholesterol, they also lower our CoQ10. Because when we lower LDL, it doesn't carry cholesterol to the body, but it also doesn't carry the CoQ10 around. So now there's a new trend to supplement with CoQ10 for any patient that takes a cholesterol-lowering medication. So for energy, we can do a lot, both lifestyle as well as supplements right now.
Yeah, but also with mitochondrial dysfunction, I like to think of the mitochondria, it's the powerhouse of the cell, right? It's like a new car versus an old car. You have an old car and, you know, out of the exhaust comes a lot more pollutants and it's damaging everything else. That's exactly what mitochondria, as your mitochondria becomes more and more damaged, it's like having, you know, a 1969 Volkswagen Beetle versus, you know, a Ferrari, a brand new Ferrari, right? That's how you could compare
That's
the
exactly
two, right?
the analogy, yes.
Yeah, so we want to preserve our mitochondria, and there's all these ways we can discuss of how to keep our mitochondria working and functioning well, in addition to the supplementation that you mentioned. So let's jump into number 7. What's number 7?
Well, the researchers called it cellular senescence. Senescence just means old, basically. And some people call these cells that are senescent zombie cells. These are just cells that really have divided many times, and they really are getting old. And normally in a younger person, those cells either auto-destruct, they just destroy themselves. That happens a lot in the human body, and that's a good thing to have. If you have a damaged cell that doesn't function, it has to self-destruct. The process is called apoptosis. That means when a cell commits suicide. However, as we age, we lose the ability to do that. And also our immune system is unable to go and clear these cells out, which happens a lot more effectively in younger people. So the result is we have these defective cells that are not just sitting there taking up space. They're actually taking up resources because they're still metabolized to some extent. So they're using up resources that could be used for other things that we need. So they're taking up that, but in addition, they have an abnormal metabolism. So they keep putting out a lot of these toxic byproducts that cause a huge amount of inflammation. And I think we talked another time about inflammaging. Every time you have inflammation, whether it's in the skin or in an organ, that causes aging of the skin or that organ and reduced function. So these zombie cells, as we get older, the senescent cells, the old cells, they increase in number and we just cannot remove them. There's actually research now for medications that specifically target those cells that can these medications supposedly can differentiate between healthy and old cells and go and destroy the senescent cells. There's ongoing intense research on that issue. And that would make a big difference. If we,
I'm going to be your analogy guide. It's kind of like an apple. I like to compare it to one bad apple rots the bunch, right? Because the apple releases gases that cause the other apples to, I guess, start to ripen. That's how apples, you know, they have a gas that they release. So this one is kind of the same. You have one senescent cell, it's the bad apple, and it starts sending signals to all the other cells, and the other cells start to, you know, in a way, begin the rotting process. So, and that ultimately causes inflammation, which, is linked to so many different diseases. So, let's jump to number 8. What would be number 8?
So number 8 has to do with stem cells. As we get older, we have fewer and fewer stem cells. So stem cells are cells that are not specialized. They can turn into anything. They don't have a specific function. We thought that stem cells disappear after childhood or after birth, but that we were wrong about that. So it turns out now that every single tissue at any age has some stem cells. So these stem cells could theoretically be exploited to regenerate and produce fresh tissue. We don't have the technology to do that. It's very likely that elderly people that I see that look 20, 30 years younger, which happens, in a small percentage of patients, but I see some patients that I can't believe they're 80. I saw today a lady, 88 years old. She looked like 60. So I'm pretty sure in her case, her stem cells are able to regenerate some of her tissues. So in most of us, that doesn't happen as easily, but the stem cells are there and they divide and they sort of regenerate our various organs and tissues. So the problem with them as we get older, it doesn't happen as often. And when there's damage, there's nothing there to fix it. That's one of the problems. However, there's ways to activate them. Talking about. I'm not even talking right now about medications, which the research is ongoing on that. I'm talking about the same lifestyle modifications we were talking about earlier will promote the division and even production of new stem cells, because they can also reproduce themselves. Not only do they become specialized cells to replace what we have lost, but they can also increase their own numbers and have more and more stem cells, which is a really good thing. That's a sign of youth as well. And when I say youth, I'm not just talking about vanity, I'm talking about healthy tissues, really.
Today I saw an article that wrote, CEO of Lululemon goes to Mexico for stem cell therapy. So tell us a little about, I don't want to get off track, but can you tell us a little bit about stem cell therapy? Why is it not legal in the US? How come people are going all around the world to get stem cell therapy? Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, we don't have the safety studies. We don't have efficacy or safety studies. I mean, there could be a lot of things that could go wrong if we start tampering with those stem cells. Those are immortal cells, right? You can't really kill them. I mean, I guess you could kill them with some very serious toxins or destroy them with radiotherapy or something like that. But stem cells, let's say we try to stimulate a stem cell in the ovaries, right? Let's say we want to increase fertility in a woman. What if that stem cell changes with some DNA mutation and becomes a cancer cell, but that's an immortal cancer cell? So we are really very small in that field. We really don't get it. I mean, we understand parts of it, but we don't understand stem cells, how they function. And most importantly, we don't know how to safely regenerate them. So I've heard of a lot of people going to other countries for infusions of stem cells. I don't know if, I mean, some of them I've seen just anecdotally, in media. They didn't look any younger than their age. I don't know if any of their diseases were cured. I think it's a fascinating field. I think we will have a lot of solutions through stem cells. But right now, I would be concerned about malignancies with tampering with the stem cells too much. And I don't really even know about the efficacy with the techniques that are available. I mean, just infusing stem cells into somebody's bloodstream, I don't know if that's really going to do anything. I think the stem cells, if they're from a different person, they probably will be attacked by the immune system as a foreign object. Now, if somebody takes stem cells from an individual and then in the lab multiplies them and then puts them back into that same person, this is just theoretical. I'm just brainstorming here. Maybe that would work, but what if there's a change in the DNA of that stem cell? So change in DNA always means more cancer and it means disease.
Interesting.
So yeah, we don't have the knowledge yet, and the research is not enough right now.
Yeah. What do you think about the future? I mean, now
I'm very optimistic about the future. Yeah. We just don't have enough information right now. In the future, yes, I think it's going to work probably in the next few decades. I think we'll be able, what I'm looking forward to is, let's say, take somebody's stem cells from their kidneys that are failing, or even any stem cell, and turn it into a kidney. That's a little bit more advanced. If you take a stem cell from a particular organ, they may be more likely to develop more easily into that organ. Or you can take from you can take a skin cell, let's say a stem cell from the skin, and turn it into, let's say, a stomach cell. That's a little bit harder, but I think it's feasible. It's feasible. The only issue is, how safe is it? So it would be great to take these stem cells, put them in a laboratory setting and create a new kidney, and then put this kidney into the patient that had that stem cell produce that kidney. It's his own kidney. I think that's going to save a lot of people. in many ways. Like also a lot of suffering will be reversed with stem cell treatments.
Mhm. So you basically are saying number 8, stem cell exhaustion. What ends up happening is as we get older, we lose these stem cells that are undifferentiated cells. They could become anything, but as we lose them, we lose the ability to repair tissue the way that,
Exactly.
we were able to do in our early 20s and so forth. So
That's exactly what it is.
we got number 8 covered. And what's number 9?
Number 9, just with all these changes, we've talked about the defective proteins, the zombie cells putting out toxic substances. The cells don't communicate as well with each other. Everything in the body, we have about, 100 trillion cells, and they coordinate beautifully. Can you imagine an orchestra with 100 trillion musicians? How hard it is for the body to coordinate all that? But yet we are able to do that. And as we age, we have difficulty now having that communication. So let's say hormones are a big issue. A lot of hormones drop. So hormones essentially signaling to tissues what they should be doing. So they go from one organ that produces that hormone, goes around the body and tells the cells what to do. So with the reduction of the hormones, there's less of that signal of what the cell should be doing. And also the cells are less receptive to those hormones, for example, just to give you one example. So the coordination between our different body systems is not as effective. And that affects pretty much every tissue in the body. It affects our brain. It affects digestion. Sometimes in older people, you see people can't digest well and their intestine just stops working. That has to do because the signaling from the brain doesn't really get to the intestine in an effective manner. So with this the sort of automated nervous system, it's called the autonomic nervous system, functions that we don't control. Our brain does it, but we are not aware of that. So a lot of this is not functioning well. Blood pressure is not well controlled. So some older people just start getting dizzy because their autonomic nervous system doesn't work. So it's hormones, it's the autonomic nervous system. It's all these things are intertwined. Also, a lot of communication has to do with the bacteria in our gut. We never really thought about them as important as they actually are. There's a connection between the brain and the intestines, and the type of bacteria we have in our intestines play a role as well. So as we get older, the bacterial flora, which means the type of bacteria that are there, are not as well balanced, and that affects our brain. Our brain also affects our intestines. So it's a back and forth negative communication that is just, resulting into a less than optimal function in various body parts and systems.
Yeah, like what is it? 95% of the serotonin in the body is created in the gut. So imagine.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, if the bacteria is off, the communication's off. Now, how are these chemicals going to make you happy? And serotonin's your happy chemical, right? So
exactly.
If you have a lack of that, well, it affects every part of your physiology. So let's review the 9 just to go over. And these are, nobody has to really know every single, we're just trying to tell you how complex aging is as a process. So number 1, we got genomic instability, right? Number 2, telomere attrition, those little aglets on the shoelaces, or AKA your DNA, those little ends, they start becoming shorter and shorter. So telomere attrition. Number 3, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, and altered intercellular communication. Okay, great. Now we got all these fancy things that we talked about.
Yeah.
What can we do today? Like, what can we start doing?
Again, the good news is that one thing that's good for let's say reversing telomere attrition is also going to help with the epigenetic changes and the stem cell exhaustion and the mitochondrial dysfunction. So this was all nice and theoretical, but in real life, we just need to do things that are common sense and then just boost it a little bit from there. So for example, starting, let's say, with what we eat. The 2 criteria that I take into account before I put anything in my mouth is, number 1, does this offer me anything? Does this food offer me anything? And number 2, does this food have any negative things? Is it going to cause me any negative effects because it has a toxic or otherwise unhealthy ingredient? Okay. So one thing that we have to be very careful about is what types of food do we eat? No packaged foods. If we want to age rapidly, just go for packaged foods. 90% of the foods in the supermarket are packaged. I don't care if they say organic package or natural or baked chips. There's no nutrition. So the two criteria I was talking about, if there's no nutrition in there, you are going to age a lot faster. All these processes we talked about are going to be accelerated. So eat fresh food, eat real food. If you eat an ingredient that's not something that grows on a tree or walks on land, that's not something you want to eat. If it says something like CD number 9 or sodium bicarbonate, which is just really baking, so just don't eat it. That's just not something that's going to offer you anything. So we want to avoid harmful substances, but we also want to eat substances that are going to accelerate the positive processes of repair in our body, right? So there's two things: avoid negative things, but also enhance the positive ones. So we eat fresh food, as fresh as we can. I was in a supermarket the other day, I'm not going to mention, there was cauliflower dated that it was packaged 3 weeks ago. That food does not have any nutrition at this point. So you want it to be as fresh as possible. You want it to be local. The reason why it's local, it doesn't travel as far, but also local means, you know, we evolve with the foods that are around us. So if I eat, let's say, something that grew in Costa Rica, that's not necessarily good for me in the winter. So we need different nutrients in the winter than we need them in hot weather in the summer. So I'm not saying we should never eat pineapple in the winter, but just try to really go with the seasons. Eat as much as seasonal food as you can and local. Extremely important is to eat organic food. It's not just that we don't have pesticides in organic food. Another major factor is that organic food has to fend for itself. It doesn't have help from fertilizers. It has to find its own nutrients, grow roots, and it has to fight off bugs. How does it do that? It produces certain molecules that are defense molecules, and those are the molecules that are very beneficial to us. All these antioxidants, the lycopene and the lutein and all that stuff, and the sulforaphane. These are all antioxidants. They're anti-cancer molecules. So an organic food will have tons more nutrition for the same amount than a conventionally grown food. In addition to that, organics are supposed to be non-GMO, not genetically modified. Until recently, they were saying, the media were saying there's no issue with genetically modified. It turns out there's studies now that clearly show they increase inflammation and even cancer. So GMO is not a good thing. So organic foods are extremely important. Then there are
Can you explain, just real quick, genetically modified foods? Can you explain what that is exactly? You know, we hear it GMO free, or what does that mean?
That's a relatively new thing. In the old days, they just used to cross vegetables that, let's say, from the same species that had certain traits that they wanted. I guess there's nothing wrong with it, even though we do tamper a little bit with nature. But now they can go into a laboratory and insert genes or take away genes from a certain plant and then plant it, and then we eat that. So we're not as smart as we think. Maybe we'll have a certain, bigger size vegetable. But what has happened? Imagine if we did this to a human being. How many human beings get cancer if, we start tampering with the genes, like we talked about earlier with the DNA mutations? So they're mutating in a laboratory the natural DNA of a plant. And then we're eating it. So we're eating a potentially sick plant, fruit or vegetable. And I don't know if they're doing it with animals. That I'm not sure. I think they might also be doing with some animals. So we're not eating normal, healthy food if we eat GMO. And
then just to go back to your organic food. So, for a lot of, especially during different seasons, there's a lack of organic food available. But if you had to choose, which foods would you say you have to eat organic? If you had
those, the so-called, there's about 10 or 12, they call them the dirty dozen, that you definitely want to eat organic. So apples and pears, try to get organic almost always if you can. Peppers of any kind, like bell peppers or other peppers, potatoes, berries, for sure. All the berries, all the peaches, plums, they really are taking into the flesh, not just on the outside, they're absorbing a lot of those pesticides. And they definitely should be organic. Celery is another one. It depends on the area and where it comes from. Some non-organic foods from Latin America, let's say grapes, those are very heavily laden with pesticides. The United States ones supposedly are not. So every year there's a publication of the Dirty Dozen. I think it changes a little bit. I think it has to do with farming practices, but definitely peppers, potatoes, berries, peaches, and any similar stone fruit, and apples and pears. Those definitely should be organic if you can.
Yeah, for my household, I have the rule of like anything that's fleshy that doesn't have a thick protective skin. So bananas, fine, avocados, fine,
Now,
oranges,
oranges.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
some of it may still get absorbed. But you're right, there's an additional layer there.
Right. There's some sort of protect, but berries for sure. I
Yeah.
read this one, or I saw it. Maybe you guys have seen it on TikTok where they squeezed out the juice from the berries and then they poured it over a plant and they used it as pesticide again. And it still
Oh,
had the
really?
same potency of pesticide. So just imagine, and especially if you have little children with their developing brains and bodies, like
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
absorbing all of that, all of those toxins and the damage, the long-term damage that it does. So what else can we do? So eat organic, avoid GMOs. What else? How about sleep? How important is sleep?
Sleep is crucial. Everybody has different needs for sleep, but generally the recommended amount of time is between 7 and 9 hours. If you start going below 7 hours, you're going to start having problems. Also, oversleeping is a problem as well. There's literature that shows oversleeping is associated with strokes. So having a healthy sleep schedule is important. And interestingly, most of the repair that's going to enhance this anti-aging mechanism that we're trying to put together here in this conversation, sleeping between 9 or 10 p.m. until 1 a.m. or so gives you the most repair. All the damage that's done is reversed and anti-aging occurs in those hours. So somebody like myself, I have to actually make some progress. I go to bed like at 1 o'clock in the morning. I've lost most of the repair opportunity, even if I sleep the same amount of 7 hours, let's say, as somebody that went to bed at 10 and woke up at 5 or 6. So the timing of sleep is extremely important. Also, the quality of sleep is important. It's important to sleep in a colder room, not to eat late at night. At least we should eat 3 to 4 hours at least before we go to bed. Wind down all the screens and TV and all that before we go to bed. And if possible, not have lights overhead. Our brain interprets overhead lights as the sun. There's actually cells in the bottom of our retina and the lower part of the eye that are not there for seeing, like most of our retinal cells. They're there just to perceive the morning light. And we fool our brain into thinking it's morning when we have overhead lights, which most of us do have. So if we do have lights on at night, let's just try to lower them and preferably have them come from below, like night lights do. Another technique is to go out of the house before 9 a.m. and get those early rays of the sun with the infrared light. There's no UV in the morning, it's mostly infrared, which are extremely beneficial for health in general. But the good thing about going early, so we don't want sun with interference of any windows, or even sometimes they say glasses or contact lenses. You want light to really flood your eyes from the side. Of course, we don't want to look directly into the sun, but that sets an alarm for 12 to 16 hours later for our natural melatonin production. So that's why it's extremely important to get up relatively early and go outside. In addition to other benefits of, getting up, you really start your day on a positive note. But for sleep purposes, you want to set that alarm clock in your brain by going outside early in the morning. For those that have difficulty sleeping, which unfortunately there's a lot of people struggling, they can try remedies that are not medical, like no medication. Something that's very simple but very effective for many is chamomile tea. Chamomile tea actually stimulates receptors like some of the sleeping pills do. It's very effective. Tart cherry juice has been found in some studies, interestingly, to be very effective. And there are some sugar-free versions of that, tart cherry juice. Another study recently, actually multiple studies, showed that eating whatever carbohydrates we eat, the starches, if we eat them in the evening, they're going to be more effective in putting us to sleep. And they actually also help with serotonin production. But for good sleep, eating starchy vegetables in the evening is promoting good sleep.
Yeah, I've also heard a warm shower before bed because your body temperature goes down during sleep. So if you increase that, there's a bigger delta in between.
A bigger difference. Yeah. Definitely warm showers. Some warm milk helps other people. So it depends on the person's. I don't see a lot of patients benefiting from melatonin as much. Some people do, but the majority, they don't really benefit very much from taking melatonin supplements, unfortunately.
Can you just quickly touch on, because I read about this quite a bit, about how sleep or lack of sleep affects the gut microbiome? Because the gut microbiome, not enough people are talking about it, and we will in the next decade. I think there's going to be so much research that talks about like, there's 3 kilograms of bacteria in your gut that really contribute to all sorts of different signaling pathways and so forth. But how does sleep specifically affect your gut microbiome, and what does that mean for longevity?
Yeah, sleep is really about the nervous system, right? The nervous system shuts down, and that's why all the other organs reduce their function. So sleep will negatively affect our brain and our nervous system. And then, as we said earlier, there's a very close connection between the nervous system and the intestine. And actually, some people, they don't get enough sleep. They get up in the morning and they have abdominal pain, or they have difficulty with their intestines that day, because there's a direct connection through nerve fibers between the intestine and the brain. So, and then it's not just the intestine that's going to be affected. Obviously, coordination is affected, concentration, muscular strength is going to be affected. So the body hasn't recovered with poor sleep.
Yeah, and the gut microbiome, they have their own circadian rhythm. So if your circadian rhythms
exactly
up, you're messing them up. So, okay, anything else that we can do?
Well, first of all, I just want to add one more thing, which I found very interesting a few months ago, and I've been implementing it, is when we were talking earlier about vegetables, and then I'll talk about the other factors. So when we want to eat, let's say, cruciferous vegetables, those are specifically broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, arugula, watercress, radishes, bok choy, and a couple of other ones. The word cruciferous comes from the shape of their flowers in the shape of a cross, but those specific ones have a powerhouse nutrient for longevity. It's also anti-cancer, antioxidant, but for longevity, you really want to look into sulforaphane, sulforaphane, sulforaphane. Broccoli are loaded with that. It is very important in reversing the aging process by promoting autophagy. Autophagy is the self-repair of the body. So these vegetables contain huge amounts of that. Now, if we chop up those vegetables before eating them or before cooking them and let them sit for about 10 minutes to an hour, that sulforaphane amount is going to increase tenfold. The plant, even though it has been removed from the ground when we're ready to eat it and we chop it up, is defending itself. The molecular mechanisms are still in place. So it's converting the precursor to the sulforaphane into the active form to defend itself against the offense of chopping. And you get huge amounts of sulforaphane when you eat that food a little bit later. Even if you cook it, it's heat stable.
No, go ahead. Good.
And another tip to increase it is to add mustard when you're eating those cruciferous vegetables. Adding mustard, if you haven't let your vegetables sit chopped up for a long time, it helps the conversion to the active forms.
Oh, interesting. Mustard. Huh.
Yeah.
Any specific kind? Dijon works?
Any, doesn't matter. Anyone, any
All
kind
right.
of mustard.
Oh, that's a good tip. I'm going to write that one down. How about medication? So we hear a lot about metformin, semaglutide. We have a lot of people in our company that are on semaglutide medications or tirzepatide. And there's a lot of longevity studies coming out about these medications and their benefits. Can you talk about which hallmark does semaglutide, metformin, these sort of drugs, where do they help?
Well, it seems to me that it's an indirect effect. I've seen huge improvements for when I see patients on those, they drop their weight goes down and their diabetes is reversed very frequently. Occasionally, they can't tolerate the side effects, vomiting and nausea, but most of them do really well on them. And I see them within a few months, miraculous changes. So by reducing weight, obviously longevity is promoted because weight is toxic. The extra fat is not just fat sitting there storing molecules, it's actually producing toxic hormones and byproducts that are very unhealthy. And then if you reverse diabetes, you really save the whole body. Diabetes causes huge inflammation in the kidneys, in the eyes, in the heart, and every single body part. So semaglutide, tirzepatide, and all these medications, by reducing weight and by reversing diabetes, make a huge difference in longevity. Now, what if a person that doesn't have diabetes or isn't overweight does take them? I don't know if that would really, I don't know of any studies that have researched that. I don't know how safe these studies would be, whether they would make the sugar drop too low in a healthy person that doesn't have diabetes, or if somebody that has a normal weight should really be taking these. So I don't know if these studies have been done. I haven't come across them. So I do believe that these are crucial for those that have issues with their weight and blood sugar. Definitely going to
some
prolong their
studies
life.
on that have come out on neuroinflammation and semaglutide's effect on neuroinflammation and reducing.
Okay, that's
it.
interesting.
But yeah, there's some that are starting to come out. But it's interesting. I mean, even with metformin, putting the body in a fasting state. So maybe we could talk a little bit about fasting and and why fasting is so important and beneficial and healthy for the body. Can you touch on that?
Yes, for many decades, we already known that caloric restriction prolongs life. We never really understood it for many years, and now we have a little bit more of an understanding. So one of the problems that we have that leads to chronic diseases, which many people are afflicted with, we eat too much and we eat too often. Every time we eat, our blood sugar goes up. That's a normal process, and then goes down again. And every time that happens, insulin is produced as well, right? So to help that sugar get into the cell. Now, if we keep constantly feeding our cells and have these constant sugar spikes and never have like a low glucose, low insulin state, the cells are constantly bombarded with sugar, constantly bombarded with insulin. They start using it up, they build things, they burn it up for energy, but we keep feeding it, and then it has nothing to do with it. It turns it into fat. So that's how the obesity issue starts. And then we still keep feeding it, even though we're overweight, and it just starts to not accept the sugar anymore. So the sugar floats in the bloodstream, and now we have diabetes. So this process can be reversed with metformin, for example, or other anti-diabetes drugs. However, there's a researcher, David Sinclair at Harvard, that's doing a lot of studies on sirtuins, which we didn't touch upon. These are longevity genes that we can actually turn on with all these mechanisms, with all these lifestyle modifications we're talking about. So he actually says that he does take metformin. There was a lot of exciting research about this, that it does prolong life and increase longevity. Right now, there are some studies that are opposing that. So we're going to have to wait some more for some more research on that. And I wouldn't recommend that anybody right now goes and take metformin for that purpose, because metformin can also cause some problems with acidosis, which means too much acid in the blood and the body. That can sometimes be dangerous. But we're still working on these. We're still fine-tuning them. Maybe metformin with another drug or some supplement could work together. So it's still new.
And how about rapamycin? We hear a lot about rapamycin. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's promising. I know actually there's a lot of funding right now going into rapamycin, and again, it's not clear. Sometimes we get excited about things and then we get disappointed. It's been happening for a long time. We used to think years ago, I think I mentioned last time when we had one of these webinars, and one of the comments said, oh, no wine. Okay. So we thought that wine was really healthy for us if we had like a glass or two every day because of the resveratrol. And it turns out, yes, resveratrol is a very good molecule. We can get it from grapes. We don't really have to drink wine per se, but it's really not as effective as we would hope. So a lot of this is still being researched. Yes, these are things that are all positive, but we have to wait to see how effective they're going to be in the long run, if they're going to make really a big difference.
Any other natural remedies that we can, or any lifestyle modifications that we didn't touch on that we could start today to
Yeah.
help?
Yeah, exercise is crucial, and avoiding over-exercising is also important. Studies have shown that those that over-exercise have actually higher mortality. And you just need a few hours a week of an intense running to reduce your lifespan. So
Mhm.
don't over-exercise. And if your body tells you that you're tired, you don't think that if you go to the gym and force yourself that you're doing yourself any favors, that you're benefiting your health. If you're tired, you need to take rest. So one of the best exercises is walking. Walking low to moderate intensity. Now, for those that want to strengthen their heart or they have a muscle building program, they can do small amounts of that. But for health maintenance, you want to be able to still be able to carry a conversation with somebody. That's the appropriate increase in heart rate. If you're out of breath, you're over exercising. If you're doing it for longevity purposes. If you're doing it for other purposes, then that's another issue. But for longevity, you want to do low intensity to moderate exercise. Now, to boost longevity during this gentle exercise, you want to take a 5-minute interval to do what's called HIIT, HIIT, high intensity interval training. What is an interval? 30 seconds of really fast walking, then you slow down for 30 seconds. Then another 30 seconds of really fast walking or swimming or whatever you're doing. Then you slow down. You keep alternating 6 to 7 cycles for about 5 minutes only, a couple of times a week. That boosts fat burning for those that want to lose weight. And it boosts the body self-repairing mechanism, the autophagy as it's called, not just for that day, but into the next day as well. So exercise, again, low intensity to moderate intensity with a 5-minute interval of this fast, slow is the best for longevity. Other things is, like we said earlier, short-term stress, like walking into a sauna for 5 to 10 minutes is great. Taking a cold shower. Some people do actually cold plunges for those that can tolerate them, assuming your heart is okay, all right? If somebody has a heart condition, they should be very careful with any of those intense stressors. But hot and cold is very, very beneficial, and the intense exercise can be very helpful. Foods that specifically have been associated with longevity, of course, all foods can be beneficial, but those that mostly help the repair mechanism and promote lifespan are omega-3s, and omega-3s from animal sources. Animal sources meaning fatty fish. There are some omega-3 sources from flaxseed, chia seeds, and others, walnuts, pecans. However, only 10% of those are converted into the form that is actually beneficial to us. So mostly from animal sources, that's fatty fish like salmon, sardines, preferably wild caught. I would recommend against eating farm fish because the fish don't eat a normal diet, so they don't produce as many of those beneficial fats. They're much lower in those nutritious omega-3s. Plus, they have all the toxins. PCBs are plastic-derived contaminants. So stay away from farm fish and get wild caught as much as you can, at least twice a week. Extra virgin olive oil is very, very important. Not only is it not a harmful oil, it is a beneficial oil. It's extremely important for longevity, heart health, diabetes, hypertension, brain function. If you can get organic extra virgin olive oil, that would be the best. I tell every patient I walk in not to eat any vegetable or seed oils. So stay away from corn oil, canola oil, sunflower seed oil. We used to think that those are healthy. It turns out they're very toxic and very highly inflammatory. And inflammation means aging and lessened life, shortened lifespan. Why are they inflammatory? They are processed at very, very high temperatures. And it's like taking a shiny piece of iron, just to do an analogy like you like to do, shiny piece of iron, and it turns it into rust. This is what happens to the oil molecule. And then we ingest that rusty, quote unquote, molecule. In addition, those seed oils, even if they're cold pressed and not heated, they're very high in omega-6s. So we talked about the omega-3s being anti-inflammatory, right? Good for longevity. Omega-6s, we need a little bit of those, but we eat way too many in our diet. And those vegetable oils have way too much omega-6, too much omega-6. We need to have a ratio of 6:1. The American diet has 20:1 omega-6s to omega-1s. So stay away from those vegetable and seed oils. Other foods that are beneficial for longevity, green tea. It has a substance called ECGC, epiglycatic chelate. So green tea, if you like it. For those that like to drink coffee, a small amount of caffeine is actually beneficial. And it turns out that even decaf coffee has beneficial molecules and ingredients that are good for us. Berries among the fruits are the best for promoting longevity, and they're also very low in the glycemic index. So for those that have issues with their blood sugar, if they eat fruit, berries are going to have the least effect on increasing their blood sugar. Ginger and turmeric as well. And the bottom line is, instead of just saying, okay, did I eat ginger today? That you don't need to do that. A wide variety of colorful vegetables, fresh vegetables is important. Every color represents a different nutrient. And if we eat them all, they work together synergistically to help to bring each other out. The benefits come out if we eat them together. So, and another tip is to eat both raw and cooked vegetables. If you take tomatoes, they have a nutrient called lycopene. That's extremely important for the eyes, for the heart, antioxidant, anti-cancer. If we cook tomatoes, we absorb 10 times more than if we eat them raw, but we lose the vitamin C that raw tomatoes have. So just eat some raw, some cooked, combinations. So just use common sense and eat as fresh as you can and cook at home if you can.
And if you're cooking for low heat, use olive oil, high heat, coconut or avocado oil.
Yeah, avocados. The 3 oils that are okay to eat are extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, and coconut oil. Now, coconut oil has some saturated fats. So for those that are watching their cholesterol and saturated fats, don't use too much. Avocado oil, yes. Now, you talked about high heat cooking. Usually high heat cooking is not recommended if we're trying to boost longevity. But yes, if you do, let's say roast, or I'd recommend definitely against deep frying or anything like that for good health. Now, another thing that I haven't touched upon that's extremely important is emotional health. Emotional health, you can do all these things right, but you may be in circumstances that create stress. And psychological stress is physical stress. When we have psychological stress, we produce more adrenaline, which is epinephrine, same thing. We produce more cortisone, so it's a physical effect. And those hormones are very highly inflammatory. Short term is okay. If you have a 5-minute stressor like that, it's good. That's how we stay awake. We wake up in the morning, we get a boost of those hormones. But beyond that, it's extremely damaging for those that have chronic stress. Job situations, toxic relationships are very negative for our lifespan. So something to consider. What kind of relationships and what kind of work you want to do, what's going to be your daily experience is crucial. That doesn't get talked about a lot, about the psychology. Maybe another time we can talk about how to avoid toxic situations and stressful long-term situations. There's a lot of literature now on that as well.
That explains why you have a lot more Centurion women than you do men, because women have stronger relationships and networks and so forth.
That could definitely be a factor. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Braimakis. This was amazing. I loved it. We covered the 9 hallmarks. We got some tips on healthy eating and lifestyle. And thank you so much. I hope you can come back and we can cover more. There's still so much to cover.
There's a lot. And hopefully in the next few months, there's going to be new things to report too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would love to discuss that. Thank you again. Thank you all of you for joining us. I hope you had some great takeaways, and we'll see you back very soon, Dr. Braimakis. And
see you soon. I hope everybody has a good night. Have a good day. Bye-bye now.
Have a good night. Take care.
Bye-bye.